Pop culture used to feel like something that we all experienced together. The Friends finale, Titanic in theaters, Justin Timberlake pulling off Janet Jackson's bra at the Super Bowl. Whether you loved it or hated it, you knew those cultural moments because everyone was talking about it. Culture wasn't universal, but it felt closer to a shared language than it does now. These days, reality doesn't feel as shared. It feels more personalized and isolating. Your feed doesn't look like mine, and the huge viral moment you saw everybody talking about might not even exist in my world. And that gap is only getting wider because the future of the internet isn't just recommendations. It could be personalization at the level of reality itself. The evolution of AI could mean that news feeds, websites, and maybe even entire movies and concerts could be generated in real time to match our preferences and our digital footprints. And then there's the physical world. Companies like Meta are already experimenting with cameras and glasses that layer digital filters onto your surroundings. What happens when those filters don't just add AR graphics, but actually bend how we see reality itself? Two people could walk down the same street, but through their lenses, one sees a polished, cheerful version, and the other a bleak and threatening one. We've always experienced the world differently, but at least we were reacting to generally the same cultural moments and events. Now, reality itself feels personalized by algorithms, and the very cultural glue that ties us all together feels like it's dissolving. When I asked you guys on Instagram if hyper-specific algorithms and online communities made you feel more connected or more isolated, 61% of people said more isolated, which was not surprising to me at all. Even though we've never had more ways to connect, it doesn't always feel like connection. But obviously there are benefits too. I mean, niche communities and diverse groups of people are able to thrive today when they never would have been able to thrive in a mainstream format. Instead of being forced to look into the same handful of cultural opinions where we all look and think and dress the same, you can find people who share your exact taste in weird hyperfixations. Whole fandoms, subcultures, and movements have been built online by people who might have never found each other otherwise. I've been doing a lot of videos on social media topics in general lately, and so I've been thinking a lot about algorithms, the advancement of AI, and how that's going to impact our social life and our sense of community. So I'm really interested in understanding, as we move further away from mainstream media and cultural moments that tie us all together, can an online community feel the same as a physical one in real life? Because a Discord server or like an Instagram group chat can feel like family, but it just doesn't replace like bumping into someone at the store or sharing a joke with a friend at school or catching up with your best friend over FaceTime. Personalized algorithms, online bubbles, and echo chambers can make us feel deeply understood, especially when, we're surrounded by people in our real life that we just can't relate to or we don't feel shares our same interests. But it can make it feel like it can replace in-person relationships. And I think my fear, especially looking at Gen Z and the impact that the pandemic had on them, is that younger generations and people in general are just no longer seeking out those small, everyday interactions with strangers that keep us civil and kind of connected to people with different opinions. What I've noticed increasingly over the years is that our online niches become echo chambers. And what ends up happening is that we tend to other anyone outside of them, even if we have more in common than we think. I wanted to explore this topic because the social and political climate in the US is more divisive and tense than ever. And I find myself regularly longing for those mainstream cultural moments that really tied us all together and made us feel like we were experiencing the same thing, whether we liked it or we didn't. Now in a post-pandemic world where everyone is angrier, more isolated, and more online, it feels like those big cultural moments connecting us are few and far between. We're more connected than ever, yet somehow lonelier than ever. One of the places this shift shows up the most is in pop culture. Decades ago, we all kind of metaphorically gathered around a shared stage, but that's now fractured into thousands of smaller stages that have worlds that don't necessarily overlap. Before the internet, culture was broadcast, not personalized. And if you turned on the radio, you heard the same top 40 hits that everyone else did. If you watched TV, you were seeing the same shows your classmates would talk about the next morning. The Beatles on Ed Sullivan drew 73 million viewers. The Live Aid concert reached nearly 2 billion viewers worldwide, and Princess Diana's funeral was seen by an estimated 2.5 billion people. The MASH finale in 1983 pulled in 106 million viewers, which is over 60% of US households at the time. Adjusted for today's population, that would be more than 150 million people, far more than even the Super Bowl. And to this day, the MASH finale still holds the record for the most watched scripted TV episode ever. So even if you didn't care, you knew about it. That's what mainstream meant. You literally couldn't escape it. The internet totally flipped that upside down. Now, two people can live online in the same week and walk away with completely different cultural realities. On one person's feed, Sabrina Carpenter and Love Island were the only conversations happening this summer. On another's, they didn't exist at all. Each person feels like they're following the cultural center, but they're not even plugged into the same world. I was talking to a friend about this actually, and she was telling me that when she travels abroad, she always finds it fascinating looking at how her For You page changes on TikTok, because in the US, she says it's very light on politics and it's more focused on trends. And then when she travels abroad, she sees so many more political videos of unrest, global protests, and things like that. So it really goes to show when you have that contrast just how much the algorithms control what we see and believe. And the more algorithms shape what we see, the more I'm concerned about what information is being tracked and stored about me online, which is why I'd love to thank today's sponsor, Delete Me. Now, before you click away, I've been paying for Delete Me since 2023. So I know you might be thinking, oh, they sponsor a lot of YouTubers. Let me just share my own personal experience with them because I have been a paying customer for a few years. The short story is that a few years ago, our address was posted on Reddit and my fiance and I were really freaked out. We just thought that someone was going to show up at our house. So we decided to just be a little bit more careful and intentional about what information is publicly available about us. And I did a bunch of research and just found that Delete Me seemed like the best option. Delete Me is a personal data removal service that removes your personal info like phone number, email, address, and family members from data broker websites. You can see my very first report here that showed my data had been removed from 61 different listings, and there were only really 4 websites that my information didn't show up on. And to date, Delete Me has reviewed 119,724 listings and removed my information from 131 different data brokers. I really like that Delete Me rescans the data broker sites every 90 days because it just gives me peace of mind and I don't have the time to do that myself. If you also love making it harder for strangers to find you online, you can get 20% off by going to joindeleteme.com/stateofkate and using the code stateofkate at checkout, or you can just scan the QR code here. In the pop culture world, we can really see the shift from mainstream media to micro communities in music. In the 1950s, everyone knew Elvis. In the 60s, it was the Beatles. The 1980s had Madonna, and the 90s had Britney Spears. You didn't need to buy the album or even like the music, you just knew who they were. And obviously there are pros and cons to that. Like on one hand, we have that shared cultural experience that keeps us connected at school, work, etc. On the other hand, media was dominated by a very narrow set of voices, most of them white and controlled by a handful of very powerful media gatekeepers. Instead of a handful of stars crossing every radio station, every TV show, every magazine cover, today's stars are built for niches. Take Bad Bunny. He's the most streamed artist on Spotify for 3 years straight, sells out stadiums and headlines festivals. But if you asked a random person on the street to name one of his songs, they might not be able to. Or look at K-pop groups like Blackpink, who move millions of albums and have fan bases so intense that they crash streaming platforms. But if you're not in that bubble, you might not even know they exist. And this is happening in nearly every space. Let's take film and television. In 2023, Barbenheimer felt like the last grasp of a true cultural blockbuster. Both Barbie and Oppenheimer were released on the same weekend, and people dressed up in costumes and bought tickets to both movies in the same day, catapulting the films to major box office success. I miss when movie openings felt like major events. Like I remember standing in line for hours to see Harry Potter, and all of us dressed up in our little costumes, and it felt like every kid at school was also interested in doing the same thing with Harry Potter. And I miss that buzz and that connection that it gave us. And knowing that there was one thing everybody kind of had in common that we could all talk about. Because even if you didn't like it, you knew about it and could talk about it. Now, new releases quietly drop on Netflix and rack up millions of views, but most of the people in your life don't even know they exist. The anticipation is gone, and so is that sense of a collective moment. Now, I don't want this, but I could even see AI technology getting to the point where entire movies are generated just based on our specific niche. I mean, if you're a film studio or a production company, why gamble millions and millions of dollars wondering if a movie is going to connect with a wide audience when an algorithm could churn out thousands of pieces of content for each niche? The film industry is already struggling. Audiences aren't going to theaters the way they used to. Studios are slashing budgets, reducing the number of productions, and leaning harder into franchises because they feel like the only safe bets. And there are lasting effects of the writer and actor strikes. It's a landscape where the appetite for risk is shrinking and personalization looks like the safer way forward. Obviously, the biggest area of concern is politics. Already, two people can scroll during an election week and come away with completely different realities. One that's filled with conspiracy theories and another maybe that's based in mainstream media. Both believing that what they're seeing is the truth and thinking that the other community is the one that is the most easily manipulated and vulnerable. But in reality, each party is seeing exactly what the algorithm thinks will keep them engaged on the platform. I think at this point, a lot of us are aware that we do exist in echo chambers online, but I didn't really feel just how disconnected I was from the broader population until the 2024 presidential election. Probably like a lot of you, my social media feeds in 2024 were filled with pro-Kamala Harris content. Yeah, there were the memes and there were the coconut tree joke videos, but there were also a lot of clips of her policies. And despite my fears, I was pretty positive about the election because the polls were showing such a close race. And I think I can speak for a lot of us when I say that the results of the 2024 election shook my world and basically the foundation of everything that I felt. I think a lot of us on the left had a huge wake-up call where we realized, wow, we live in a bubble, and we think that the majority of people share our opinions because that's how our feeds look, when in reality, we are super disconnected, and when we cut out people who don't share all of our opinions, those echo chambers get smaller and smaller and smaller. And who controls the algorithm matters just as much as the algorithm or the platform itself. After the US forced TikTok to hand its operations over to Oracle, the government framed it as a win for security. But all that's changed is which company gets to decide what shows up on millions of Americans' feeds. Oracle is led by Larry Ellison, who's one of the only Silicon Valley executives to openly support Trump. And I didn't write the specifics down, but I also know that Larry Ellison was the guy who joined a call to overturn the 2020 election results. So you don't want that guy controlling your algorithms. If algorithms are already shaping our political reality, imagine the influence of a private corporation with both commercial interests and political ties to Trump, controlling what millions of Americans see and accept as truth. And with AI, the gap between what is true and what feels true is only going to get wider. And my fears with AI in politics is that we could get to the point where we're seeing AI-generated political ads and AI-generated headlines that are specifically tailored to be generated to your specific fears and play into like confirming your existing biases. For most of the 20th century, politics was shaped by mass media events that the whole country experienced together. Like the Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960 drew 70 million viewers, and a lot of people argue that it literally shifted the race overnight. Walter Cronkite's coverage of Vietnam in the late 1960s was so trusted that it influenced presidential decisions. Now, politics doesn't play out on one stage. It plays out in millions of clips, each edited, reframed, and pushed to the audience most likely to react. And our attention spans are so limited and so short that people aren't even watching the full debates or watching the full speeches or reading full articles. They're just consuming content that has been clipped and pushed for virality. According to Politico, 3 in 5 Gen Zers between the ages of 13 and 26 say they get their news from social media at least once a week, with 45% between the ages of 18 and 29 saying they got the news from TikTok. The article goes on to say, quote, "Many young people are growing deeply skeptical of institutions and more inclined toward conspiracy theories, which makes them shun mainstream news outlets and immerse themselves in narrow online communities, which then feeds them fabrications based on powerful algorithms and further deepens their distrust. The ramifications are potentially huge for American politics. Without some sort of course correction, a growing piece of the electorate will find itself falling victim to fake news and fringe conspiracy theories online, likely driving the hyperpolarization of our politics to new heights." We already have deep fake political ads, targeted misinformation, and algorithms that promote emotionally charged content. With AI rapidly advancing and knowing that every video you see could be fake, reality doesn't start to feel real anymore because nothing feels real anymore. And that collapse of trust kind of like encourages this apathy that I feel like could be just as dangerous as manipulation. As these algorithms and AI continue to be more powerful, we're each just going to be pulled deeper and deeper into our own outrage loops, finding less and less common ground with each other. We're becoming more and more like a series of isolated groups, maybe finding connection within each other, but being disconnected from the larger community. And I've been thinking about that a lot when it comes to politics because how can we have like free and fair elections if we end up becoming a society that doesn't even have common ground with each other? What happens if there's no common world to govern? So we've talked about how community, culture, and politics have splintered into little micro communities, but what do we do about that? The way forward isn't to chase some big collective moment or to like push for mainstream media, but to build real connection and focus on being intentional within your communities. I think the first step is to just start small and focus on the people in your real life. So your friends and family, your coworkers, your neighbors, the people you talk with every day, maybe your group chat, and focus on building real connection there. So maybe ask one of your Instagram friends if they want to FaceTime. That's something that's worked really well for me. Oh my God, I just lost my hearing in one ear. My ear is ringing. And this one feels deaf. What is happening? Hello? Hello? I think it's over. Something that's worked really well for me to ground myself and form more community is honestly talking to everyone, even knowing the names and backstories of all the cashiers that you see on a regular basis. Also, get to know your neighbors. Like, we have such a close relationship with our neighbors in Ojai because we go over to their house all the time for dinner and they'll come over to ours for drinks. And that has really helped us to form a community at home in Ojai where we really don't know anyone. Check in with your friends that you haven't talked to in a while, or, even complimenting a stranger on the street I find to be really effective. Like, if I see a woman wearing a cute outfit, I will always say like, oh my God, I love your jacket, or oh my God, I love the way you did your hair, something like that. And not only does it immediately put a smile on someone's face, but then a lot of times they'll give me a compliment back and then we'll start chatting and things can just go from there. And I think the most important one is diversify your bubble. So check out different local events, sign up for book clubs or other creative workshops, look into volunteer opportunities. Like for me, I'm connected to the Humane Society because I've started volunteering for them. My only 4 friends where I live in Ojai just moved away, which is devastating. And so I'm actively trying to find people in my community. So all of these things are very top of mind for me. And, when it comes to social media, all of these videos I make for myself, not for anyone else. Like, these are things that I'm thinking about, that I'm worried about, that I want to find solutions for. Just like with my rage bait video, that video was for me because I'm susceptible to rage bait. So I hope that you're finding a little common ground with me on some of these issues. That was embarrassingly cheesy, but I hope you're finding some of these videos insightful and helpful. And if you have any other suggestions about forming community, feeling more connected in an increasingly isolated world, let us know, because I think a lot of us are really kind of struggling with the same fears and the same different types of isolation. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you and I hope you're well, and I'll see you in the next one.